Good afternoon, and welcome to the monthly meeting of the Civilian Police Review Board. This will be meeting 3 for us. One of the first orders of business today is to welcome our new board member. So I would like to welcome Dr. Damaris Medina Cortez. Am I correct in how I pronounce that? If not, please correct me.
First name is Maris. Spanish pronunciation.
I see this in the parentheses, but I wasn't getting it, so thank you. So, Dimad, is that correct?
Dimari.
Dimad, okay.
Yes,
You're going to
ma'am.
have to work with me. I may have
That's
to get some personal lessons. But welcome, and would you like to share something about yourself with the members of the Civilian Review Board? And then after this, I'm going to have each board member introduce yourself, but just basically say your name and your affiliation, okay?
Just honored to be here and to have an opportunity to be a part of this board.
Well, again, thrilled to be here, and you're not sharing this, but I will tell you that in your personal background, you have a lot of investigative experience. As I recall, and I'm not sure if this has changed, you are currently with the Attorney General's office, and I believe the area of investigation is Medicaid fraud.
That is correct.
Great, good. So again, welcome.
Thank
Our
you.
next board member?
Mark Fluharty, I'm from the Central Ohio Labor Council.
Mary Younger, retired from the Public Defender's Office.
Aaron Thomas, community member.
Charles Tatum, pastor of Good Shepherd Baptist Church in the Linden area, and also the chairperson of the Concerned Linden Clergy Group.
Willard McIntosh, retired Columbus police officer.
Rich Nathan, pastor of Vineyard Columbus.
Brooke Burns, Ohio Public Defender.
To Kyle Strickland with the Kerwin Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity and the Roosevelt Institute.
So again, welcome, and hopefully as time goes on, we will be able to find a way to get to know each other a little bit better without violating the public meeting law. So for example, when you have the training at the academy, we're going to be in smaller groups of 3 or 4 that might give you an opportunity to get to know those folks that you're with. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes from our September meeting. May I get a motion for, and I think, I haven't been asked to do this by the folks in the back, but I do understand that because we're wearing the mask, that when you, I guess, play this back, it's hard to hear some of us. So I would ask you to speak up as much as you can and to speak into the mic. Is there a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So moved.
And that's Pastor Tatum, second?
Second.
And second, Pastor Nathan. Are there any questions or concerns about the minutes? Then all in favor of approving them, please raise your hand. Thank you. I think next on our agenda, we are to return to Chief Counsel Laura Baker Moorish to continue reviewing the bylaws.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I am going to take off my mask if that's all right. I am actually speaking in front of an audience, so I am exempt from the mask ordinance. It would when you're speaking, yes. So I want to thank everybody. I did take the comments that were made by board members from the last time that we gathered regarding the bylaws, and I provided some suggested edits. We also did not completely get through the original iteration of the bylaws, so I think we're starting on the Inspector General, which is Article 5. So if it's all right with the board, Chair Jackson, what I'd like to do is go back to the ones that I provided some amendments to and make sure that I have adequately captured what the board was asking for. And if those are good, then we can finalize those and then go on to the last portion, which doesn't have as many, I think, controversial issues to attach. Is that? Thank you. So in that case, Article 1, The first thing that I did, based upon the comments that I received last time, is that there was an indication that for some of the more significant areas where a board vote was required, such as the changing of the bylaws or the election of the Inspector General, which is required by statute, that in those particular cases, and only in those cases, that it would require a 2/3 vote of the seated board. And so I tried to make sure that that was then consistent throughout the bylaws, and that every other regular action of the board would be a simple majority of the board members who are attending. So the first place where that came up is in Article 1, Section 2, where it says immediately upon adoption by a 2/3 vote of the seated board. That's an attempt to capture that as commented upon. And then the same thing with Section 3. The board may amend these bylaws from time to time by a 2/3 vote of the seated board. And I just want to make sure that that corresponds with everything that was discussed last time. Hearing no concerns? Cool. The other adjustment that I made to this section was Article 1, Section 3. I also extended that from 5 days to 7 business days prior to a vote being able to receive the proposed amendments going forward. And I think that's a result of the conversation that was happening last month. Is that right? Yes.
So the question around the 2/3 vote of the seated, Michael? Yes, it's right now. Hello? All right, I'll speak louder. The question around the 2/3 vote of the seated board piece. So if we were in a situation and circumstance where the board, again, we've talked a little bit about this, but let's say there's only 5 members on the board.
Right.
Is there a process for basically, instead of like making bylaws at that point, like the priority would be to seat the board and then start making these changes around the bylaws, or is there?
As it's written right now, that would not be the case. There was no specific requirement that the entire board be composed or that a certain portion of the board be composed. That is something certainly that the board could consider. But of course, in order to enact the bylaws, the individuals who are seated could also say, I'm going to defer on doing that until we have more board members present.
Gotcha. All right, just want to make that for the record. I think that's important. Thank you.
Any other questions with Article 1? Okay, great. Article 2. Article 2, Section 1, this is where we go to define a little bit more clearly what constitutes a quorum, kind of related to your question, Member Strickland. A quorum shall exist when a majority of the members appointed to and serving on the board are present. So it's appointed to and serving. Unless a greater number is otherwise required by these bylaws, a majority vote of the total votes of the board members present when a quorum exists shall constitute action of the board. And that's, again, what I just said before. So unless these bylaws specifically require for a higher amount, then it's the majority of people who are present at a meeting where a quorum has been established that will carry any motion. And that's pretty typical for most boards and commissions. So if that adequately represents what we discussed last time, that's I think the only amendment that I made except for, oh no, there's one other. The third paragraph down, a board member who for any reason seeks to voluntarily resign from the board shall do so by submitting a written letter, and I took out signed to acknowledge that email is often used, and that resignation letter will go to the chairperson rather than trying to email or are required to sending it to the entire board. And that was the only other change on this page. Any questions or concerns? Does that reflect what was said last time? Okay. And moving on to the next page, Section 3. This was the discussion about removal of a board member and attendance. I reflected that in a couple of places in the bylaws. This is the first place where that's reflected. Any board member who shall have been absent from 2 consecutive regular meetings of the board without having been so excused by the chairperson shall be deemed to have neglected their duty, and the board may seek to recommend to the mayor that the member be removed. So it's not a requirement, but it is indicating that if you're absent from 2 consecutive without excusal, then that's something where it could rise to the question of raising that before the other board members as to whether or not that's something that needed to occur. Does that accurately reflect the discussion from last time? Excellent. All right. The last thing I did on this one At the bottom of the page, we talked about the time for the comprehensive training program, so I extended that from 3 months to 6 months from the time of appointment. And then at the very bottom, I made the same correction that I mentioned before, 2/3 vote of the seated board for any behavior constituting inefficiency, neglect, or malfeasance in office. So that's just to reflect the other ones. Okay. There were no changes to Article 3. Article 4, attendance. This goes back to what I just said, and this lays it out a little bit more clearly. Should virtual, well, that starts with that, sorry. Should virtual attendance be authorized by an act of the General Assembly, by order of the governor or mayor, or by an amendment or waiver of provisions of the city charter, then the board may perform its duties in accordance with any virtual attendance requirements that may be so provided. This is to reflect back what happened, of course, last summer when there was an emergency order allowing for boards and commissions to meet virtually because of COVID-19. That was accomplished in the city of Columbus when the mayor, in addition to declaring an emergency at that time, also specifically put out an executive order waiving waiving and setting aside most regulations and rules within the revised code regarding when a commission or board has to meet. But the problem that we found out is that each individual, such as area commissions and boards, had their own set of bylaws. So even though the mayor had waived a bunch of the statutory requirements that existed, each one of those individual entities had to get together and look at their bylaws. So this allows for some flexibility in the event that there is something going on like COVID, and hopefully, knock on wood, we're beyond that having to happen. But also, if the state law changes regarding open meetings such that it might allow a board like this to be able to meet virtually from time to time, you would be able to make that call as a board as to whether or not you wanted to remain being open, or if you could do some of the work virtually. So this doesn't require it, but it would authorize it in the event that those things were to occur. Everybody good with the language on that? Okay. Then empty page, and I believe, where's that stuck? I believe we're actually up to Article 5 in the Office of the Inspector General, and this is where we kind of left off last time. So Section 1 of Article 5 describes the role of the administrative coordinator. Right now, Colleen from the mayor's office has been serving in that function, but once the inspector general is selected and the department of the inspector general is filled out with employees to conduct the work of that department, is contemplated within the bylaws that there will be an administrative coordinator from that department to basically staff this board in order to provide for some administrative support. So what I have listed here is by no means a required list, but it's the kinds of things that we would expect a coordinator to do. These are some of the functions that are performed by other staff members in the city of Columbus for other boards and commissions that meet throughout the city, and so that's why they're suggested, but you're by no means, tied to any one of these in particular. And so I'd be open to hearing any feedback that the board might have about things that are of concern, things that are good, bad, if this is a comprehensive list, or if there are any things that are missing or should be excluded. It's mostly administrative, sorry. For instance, A, prepare at the direction of the chairperson the agenda. That's literally the administrative task of putting together the agenda in the way that Colleen has done for us here today. It would certainly be within the chairperson and the board's obligations and duties to decide what things should go on the agenda, but the actual act of preparing it and passing it out. And then receiving correspondence, responding to requests for additional information, including coordinating requests for legal counsel or legal advice from our office, maintaining records, responding to public records requests, forwarding additional documents that might be necessary for your review in the event that there was a hearing and there were documents that you needed to see. G, I highlighted making all arrangements for a court reporter. That's certainly not required, but at some point the board needs to decide how records of hearings might be taken down. Are they going to be court reporters? Is it going to be only visual, audio? How is that going to occur? With respect to regular meetings, reminders about the time to convene. Publication, again, here it says in the city bulletin, but a lot of times that's not necessarily required if it's on a city website. Contacting new board members with orientation materials and other duties as assigned. So the administrative organization of the board.
Is the 48 hours, is that a normal kind of standard call for the city in terms of
It is.
message? Okay.
It is standard, and there are also open meetings requirements saying that I think at least 24, and you're supposed to have a general standard schedule, and then if there is a special meeting or if there's need to move the meeting time, then it's pretty much 24 to 48 hours to give everybody opportunity.
Great.
Yeah. The Inspector General attendance this is at board meetings. Now, obviously, this is not a bylaw for how the Inspector General is going to behave. This is only a suggestion for the Inspector General's role at the board meetings, which is why it's so scant here. The Inspector General designee shall be in attendance at all board meetings and may be called upon to provide status updates on pending administrative review or other matters. That's a typical relationship between a board and an executive director, that they or their designee would be in attendance and provide a report and answer any questions. And that's all for Article 5. Any other comments, thoughts, additions, subtractions? Makes my day.
Since we're only meeting once a month for a couple of hours,
Yeah.
might it make sense for the Inspector General to lead our meeting instead of having a designee?
I think that's largely left in here, not because there is a desire for the Inspector General not to be here, but there might literally be times when the Inspector General cannot. For instance, if they get called out of town, if they're ill, if there could happen. And that way, there's some flexibility to allow them to designate somebody. But certainly, the board would be able to indicate to the Inspector General, we really want you here, for this particular meeting. And that would be something that they would need to be attending to. Questions? All right, I'm going to move on to Article 6, Legal Counsel. The board shall be represented by counsel from the city attorney's office. Upon notification by the board that legal counsel is required, the administrative coordinator shall contact the city attorney's office to coordinate the assistance needed. The city attorney or designee shall be in attendance at all board hearings and may be in attendance at board meetings if called upon to provide legal guidance. This is generally how the city attorney's office responds to boards and commissions. We always have a city attorney that is staffed, and in this case, it's Robert Tobias, who's behind me, who will be attending boards and commissions. Normally speaking, we will attend every single time that there's a hearing of any kind before the board. That's because it's a quasi-adjudicatory matter. We want to make sure we preserve the record and offer any legal advice the board might need. We will also attend anytime you have a legal question that you want to ask us. If there's a specific opinion of the city attorney's office that you're seeking or guidance, we will be here. Generally speaking, as this board is new, we will probably be here more often than not, because there's a lot that's going on in terms of creating the board. But generally, we don't attend every single meeting of every board or commission unless it's required, because simply we don't have enough people and there are a lot of boards or commissions. But with that said, I can tell you that because you're in the startup mode, we'll be here more often than not. Great. And Article 7, regular meetings. This again is pretty standard from other boards and commissions in the city. Section 1, procedural rules. Meetings of the board shall be open to the public. Generally, regular meetings shall be conducted in accordance with these bylaws, and where the bylaws are silent, Robert's Rules of Order may be consulted. I didn't make it a requirement because it's very formal if you were to follow all of the parliamentary rules of Roberts, but it's a nice place to have a reference in the event that something comes up and you have to make a decision about how to respond. This most often comes up if the rules don't address, for instance, what happens if you have a tie vote, or what happens if you have somebody who has to abstain. Robert's Rules provides a number of options for the board to consider at that point. Quorum. All meetings convened for official action must have a quorum present. That's also in your charter and/or ordinance, or both. To conduct business, if a quorum is not present or not maintained, the present board members may discuss matters of general concern, but official action requiring a vote cannot be taken. And that's a general rule of a board or commission, that you must have a quorum in order to take official action. And Section 3, order of business. This, again, is just an idea. You don't have to follow this whatsoever, or you may even decide you don't want it in your bylaws, but they often are in bylaws what a general agenda will include or what a regular meeting will include. So this is just a suggestion, and we can certainly take some things out or add some things. Normally, you'd start with a roll call. Sometimes that's done by the administrative coordinator, sometimes that's done by the chairperson. That's really the board's decision. Approval of minutes, presentation of any reports from committee chairs once committees are selected. Inspector General report, that's pretty standard, that the executive director would have us place on the board to report to the board. Discussions of matters of old business, new business, correspondence, and adjournment. And of course, if there were hearings before the board, they would also then be scheduled into the meeting agenda, but they're not going to occur every time, so they're not on a standard meeting. So are there any items that we think that are not appropriate, things you want to add, things you want to subtract, or is this good? Yes.
Around the hearings, the question around hearings. So if it's not a standard element of a board meeting, let's say somebody from the public was here and wanted to comment on something, how do we create the space for that? Are we planning to create the space for that?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be largely led by the board, but I can tell you how other boards and commissions handle it. So for some boards and commissions, most of their work is hearings. And so every one of their meetings is essentially an agenda of items that they're hearing. And that's typical for like BZA, Graphics Commission, things like that. Other boards, I'm thinking the Board of Health is a good example. Board of Health has a large amount of business that is just the Board of Health business. And so often, if they have to have a hearing, it could potentially be a special hearing that they have set aside specifically for that purpose, or it can be an agenda item on their regular board meeting. So a lot of the answer to your question is going to depend upon how the volume ends up going with this particular board. Right now, there aren't any hearings because it's the Inspector General hasn't been picked yet. But once you have one, it's going to have to be kind of a board decision. If you're having one a month, it could be part of your regular board meeting. If, on the other hand, there are numerous hearings that are stacked up, then it might be necessary for the board to decide to meet specifically for a hearing day. But this would allow for some flexibility because this only is about the board meeting itself. And so that way you can either not reflect the hearings or reflect the hearings and adjust as the volume goes.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other thoughts about the order of business? Good? Yep. All right. And I have one more. Article 8, adoption, certification, and publication of rules and regulations. Since we had not gotten to here last time, I had not made amendments to it, but I recognize, having made those amendments regarding the adoption of bylaws, that's probably also going to apply then to rules and regs. So in the second paragraph where it says rules and regulations may be adopted by a majority vote of the entire membership, it'd be my recommendation to make it consistent that this would also be 2/3 of the seated board. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. And same thing down below where it currently says 5 days. This should also be 7 to be consistent with how bylaws are adopted. Good? Okay. Same thing in section 2. Immediately upon adoption, it says a majority vote. That should just be a vote of the board. That would then reference back the 2/3 above. And in section 3, the board may amend or repeal rules and regulations. That should then also be a 2/3 vote of the seated membership of the board and 7 days notice. So again, those are not huge changes. They're what we've already done in other sections, but they would also need to be amended here. But other than that, are there any questions, concerns? This is pretty standard and derived mostly from the existing city code and charter amendment, charters.
Any questions or concerns from members of the board? Then at this point, and I'm looking to you for guidance, the changes that you've made in the last few sections were pretty minimum, the 2/3 and the 7 days.
Yes.
So is it appropriate at this time for the chair to accept a motion from a board member for the adoption of our bylaws?
I believe that it would be appropriate if the board is comfortable with doing that, since, as you pointed out, the only amendments that we've made during this conversation were to that very last page where I think there is agreement. So it would be appropriate if the board's interested.
I'd like to hear from members of the board. I think it's very important for us to have bylaws in place. I don't know if there's any further discussion or anything else that board members would want. So if not, the chair would entertain a motion for the adoption of draft 2 with the necessary corrections that were pointed out?
So moved.
They're so moved. Second from Dr. Jones. Any further questions or concerns? Then are we ready for a vote? All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. This was a very important piece of work. I want to thank you so much, Ms. Laura Baker-Morrish, for your hard work, on this. But again, very, very important, and I think to have it done by our third meeting is a good sign. So thank you.
Chairperson.
Yes.
If I may ask a question, will we be able to view this document in its entirety before our next meeting? Because of those necessary changes that need to be made in it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll have it sent out again with those corrections
Correct.
made.
And Chair Jackson, because we just adopted these, you're probably going to have to certify them and send them to the administrative coordinator and send them to council. So as soon as I'm able to get back to my computer to accept all the changes, make the ones we talked about today, I can forward them to Colleen to prepare for that process to occur, and then they're going to become part of the public record and be open to being distributed to all members of the board as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
The next item on the agenda is to go back to again review the social media policy. At our last meeting, I asked board member Brooke Burns and again Laura Baker-Morrish to get together, and so we're anxiously awaiting to hear.
Thank you. And I want to thank Laura for sending me a quote from a case. So at our last meeting, Deputy Director Speaks let me know that there was a Sixth Circuit decision that kind of defined impair. So I went and did some digging, and the case law is not simple. So I'm going to say that out front. There's like a two-part test, then there's a four-part balancing act that all talks about what impair means, and it gets a little cumbersome. But the context in which it shows up is mostly in an employment relationship and when a public employee speaking in their public capacity goes out and makes a statement about the entity for which they do business. And so I think it's helpful to keep that in mind. And looking at this language, the language says impair working relationships within the city. One of the suggestions, or the suggestion that Laura sent to me, which I think helps from a perspective of me being a constitutional lawyer, is narrowing the language to impair working relationships within the Department of the Inspector General or among the board. Part of the reason why I think that's helpful is because the city is pretty broad. It's the entire city of Columbus. And the way that the employment case law works itself out is, it's specifically if we as a board member were to go out and make a public statement about other board members in the context of a case that we're discussing, or if we were to go out and say something about an investigation that's happening that could be, that we might say is free speech, but that then impedes on us as a board being able to actually make a fair and impartial decision about that thing. And so that's really what I wanted to try and encapsulate, is not just that impair relationships within the cities just seemed a little bit too broad. Yeah, and so I think that that sentence that Laura suggested, which I'll read again, feels like it fits. It would require striking within the city and instead say within the Department of the Inspector General or among the board.
And Chair Jackson, if I could be heard on that as well. Thank you to Member Burns. We did have that conversation, and I just wanted also just to state for the record that the reason that I made the recommendation in this case in particular is because the Office of the Inspector General and the board itself, the Civilian Police Review Board, were designed by charter to be more independent. And so while I would certainly, as a member of the city attorney's office, state that impairing working relationships within the city is defensible in the light of First Amendment case law and employment law, I think that this is a unique situation where it was designed by our charter for this entity and for the department to be operating parallel to, but kind of separate from the rest of the city, and because your role is also going to be in terms of analyzing and making recommendations regarding employment matters related to other departments within the city, that it made some sense to narrow it for this particular purpose.
So I agree. For clarification, I think it's important. One thing that I would, I actually think removing the first point altogether can get you there, because the second is impede or interfere with board requirements or that of a city employee, which seems to be trying to address some of these conversations about working relationships that we're referring to. Because otherwise, when we add the additional layer of specifics here with impair working relationships with Department of Inspector General or other members of the board, that still to me seems really hard to kind of, encapsulate, whereas the point 2 says impede or interfere with the board requirements or that of a city employee, seems to suggest that that gets at that very point, because otherwise I think it makes it seem like, what does that mean exactly, impairing working relationships with the Department of Inspector General or your other board members?
And there is
Board members, Strickland, I disagree with you. I think that this should stay in, and I think it should specifically speak towards the board and the Office of the Inspector General, and I don't see that as being the same thing. So when you say impair, as we sit here right now, we might not be able to, I don't say to define, but if in fact certain activities are happening and it comes to the level of impair, I hate to say we'll know it when we'll see it, but we need to have the ability to have it addressed. And I think it needs to be in this policy. So that's the position of your chair. Yes, Laura?
I was also going to address the case law regarding impede or impair as being a higher level of action. It has to almost be in the affirmative attempt to hinder, almost like an obstruction. Whereas impairment can discuss the destruction of relationships or the inability to then meet as a board because of behaviors that have occurred. And so it's not to the level of having to have that intention to interfere or to stop, but in fact the behavior can still effectively stop the board, and that's why impairment is distinguished out from impede.
Thank you for that clarification. The worry, the concern that I have is when you're going to be dealing with the issues that we're dealing with as a board, there will be contentious issues, there will be divisive issues among the board, among the city, among anybody, and the concern I have is someone's behavior or statement or conversation being interpreted as impairing these relationships of the board or the operations of the board, but may have not been intentional, which I think is where the impede and interfere conversation fits. So that's my only concern. I think it can be very subjective when we're having the conversations around impair versus a conversation around impede or interfere. So that's my only concerns. It's kind of subjective in terms of how we're defining what impair is versus impede versus interfere.
If I could, I'll share a little bit more, and maybe it'll be one of those things that helps require a footnote. One of the examples, the Sixth Circuit case that was decided in 2016, I think it was called Hammond. The thing that, it was a fire department member, the thing that he had typed on social media that rose to the level of a case, which, by the way, he actually won. He didn't lose this case, so if that gives anybody a sense of kind of how far this language has been interpreted to go, there was a board member or a board meeting that happened when someone else commented about what went on at a board meeting. So a member of the public at the board meeting, said something about the board meeting. He, as this fire department member, then goes on, uses some colorful language to refer to the board members who run this commission for the fire department. He was terminated. And then in his wrongful termination suit, he raises that the same issue I brought up was that impair was unconstitutionally vague. And so There's this huge, very long analysis, and that's the part that applies here, which just talks about in your public capacity, what can you say? Now, because of the fact that his post ultimately was seen as being written by a private citizen, he was not saying it in the role of his fire department capacity, ultimately, it was found that it could not apply to him. And so, unfortunately, there's not a lot of cases because social media has not become, or has now become more of a thing that we do, but it actually is a pretty narrow definition, and that was kind of what I was getting at when I raised the issue. It is almost one of those things where you have to see the case law to see what it is and what it isn't. And where it would arise is if one of us were to lose our position on the board because of this policy, and then we were to raise a lawsuit about it, that this analysis kicks in. It's not necessarily on the front end. It becomes a thing that we raise if one of us is terminated for something we say in a social media post. It doesn't help the clarity issue, because like I said, the opinion is pages and pages long. The analysis is pretty lengthy. At the end of the day, the fire department member kept or got back his job. He didn't lose it. But the court did go through a lot of grappling to talk about what does impair actually mean. And so it is very specific about talking in your public capacity, which maybe it's necessary to include that in this sentence, because if you say it as a private citizen, that's not the actionable thing.
Let me come back to Laura. Is this policy one that the board is to vote on? Is this an adoption of a policy?
That's an interesting question, Chair Jackson.
So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're eventually going to get this matter resolved. I would like for you and Board Member Burns to go back, and she talked about some new language today and a footnote. So let's get it done that way. And then I'd like for you to ascertain whether or not there needs to be a vote of the board. And we will kick this to the November meeting. Okay?
Chair?
Yes.
I just had maybe a recommendation. I think it might be helpful for us to have some discussion of some guardrails here for our board. For example, I got a media inquiry just last week regarding the police officers who allegedly were involved in drug trafficking. As a board member, I don't know, did some of you also get that?
Every week.
Okay, so then it would be, I think, helpful for us to just have some degree of consensus regarding what is the language that we all feel comfortable with. If we're going to have a working relationship and a relationship of trust with each other, what's the language that we feel comfortable in responding to inquiries of any kind? You know, is it no comment? Is it this may come before the board and therefore, you know, we don't have any liberty to speak? What is exactly we're supposed to do to respond to those sorts of inquiries? I've gotten several. You say you're getting them every week. I'm not getting them every week, but I've gotten several, and I'm just wondering, you know, I was left with, well, I'm going to play it really safe and conservatively here and simply say this may come before the board. I can't comment on any live issue at all, but I just think it would be helpful for us to
I
agree with,
you.
you know, come up with a consensus.
And maybe, again, I still want this done. So the November board meeting, I think, and I'm trying to remember, but I think that the only thing that's on the agenda would be Mr. Furby.
I believe that's correct.
So, and I see Mr. Furby towards the back of the room. Would we be able to say, let's set aside 30 minutes for the discussion that Pastor Nathan just described? Okay, so why don't we, again, bring the document back, but we would also set aside, but am I also correct that somewhere and I don't think it's in the ordinance, is there something that addresses media requests and the board chair?
There was a media response that was received from the office of the mayor earlier as well that was signed. I can't remember what that was. Do you remember that? No?
But I would say, let's have that discussion, but
Okay.
may I just share with you my thought at this moment, and somewhat is kind of watching the behaviors of the media. It seems that they are calling board members on matters that have nothing to do with the sport. And they will probably continue to do that on a variety of subjects. So I would suggest to you, I mean, as someone who's had to deal with this for many years, no comment is absolutely appropriate. So that's a thought just for now. Or you could also, as here, you can refer it to Robin Davis and the mayor's office. So I think I saw Dr. Jones and Robert Tatum. Yes.
So I would just like to chime in this conversation because I think some of us have unique positions outside of this board, which actually constitutes us as being experts in this field, and I'm just using myself as an example. So as you all know, I am a professor of criminology and criminal justice, and I'm assistant dean at a university. Prior to my appointment on the board, I was regularly consulted by the media on these issues, and I will continue to be a consultant to them on these issues. And that situation that you brought up, they did reach out to me, and I did respond, and I did make a comment. And so I think it's a nuance in how we actually respond. So I don't necessarily agree to the no comment right now, because as for me, I am positioned to make a comment on those issues because I am informed, I am an expert in the field, considered one, and so I know how to navigate the media. But I think, this does warrant a conversation. If we're going to push it back to the next meeting, I think that is appropriate. But I think in taking in our position with the board, we also have to be considerate and mindful of what we do outside of the board and how that also may qualify us to speak on these issues.
I absolutely agree with you, and that certainly was not in any attempt to have a mandate. But if there are members of the board who are not accustomed to, you're answering the phone and it is a reporter from whatever, again, I would just share with you, be cautious before you get kind of pulled into making comments. In Dr. Jones' case, superbly qualified, because that's what you do. But for others, and just to be comfortable to say, no comment. I mean, and again, I've been there when people have tried to press and press and press, and I said, no, I've been saying no comment frequently since April of last year. But again, I do think we should have, a discussion that's truly beyond just the words on this piece of paper, and hopefully it would work for November. Yes, sir.
Sister Chair, I have another issue, and it goes beyond the media because Dr. Nathan and we not only represent, certain factions sitting at this desk, but we also represent our peers. And I'm constantly being bombarded by my peers about certain things in reference to this board. But two of the things that I can tell them right now, first of all, we're in our infancy. We're just putting the foundation together, so we don't know how we're going to operate. So therefore, I'm not equipped to give you any kind of an answer. And then number two, I always tell them these hearings are open to the public. So therefore, if you want to really know something, then why don't you chime in and listen in for yourself, and to see what we are actually doing. Now, when it comes to media, I just tell them right off the bat, I have no knowledge of that. If you want to get any kind of information, you need to contact our chair.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Here's
you.
her cell phone.
Thank you. Well, one of the disturbing things, and this is just a matter of time, or changes in time, is, in fact, many of them have found access, and it might even be from our applications, to phone numbers, including your cell. I'm one of those dinosaurs that still has a landline, and there are a few of them who have access to that. So you do just need to be prepared sometimes to answer a phone. And and someone who was there. I recently had the pleasant experience of a reporter first reaching out to me in an email to ask if he could have a conversation on a different matter. Was there another hand? Yes.
Yeah, so I completely agree with the idea of really specifically setting aside time to have a discussion about these very issues, because I think this impacts in terms of public perception of the board, but also as board members, the role in which we play as individuals, but then of course, not representing the board itself, but understanding the working relationships, all those details. But I think those are really important factors. And at the same time, I think ahead of that meeting, if we had some, recommended steps or guardrails to think about, because what I don't want to see happen is if, we come to the meeting in November, we have a big discussion, no real resolution moving forward, and then we push it to December and January and so on. Because this is a really, this is a big discussion. I think it warrants a conversation. Yeah.
Good point. And I've heard both from you and Pastor, and I don't know if there would be a third person who would want to join you. Would you be willing to meet before our November meeting to sort of come to us with things you would want us to include in the conversation?
Yeah, we'll have to chat. I'm going to be out of town for a few weeks, but.
And is there
we'll-
someone else who wants to join? I'm sorry. Okay. Was there anyone else?
I was saying I could help with that.
Good. So that's 4. I always have to watch my numbers. Can't get close to quorum. Okay. All right. So thank you. Thank you. We look forward to hearing from you at the November board meeting. And a great point that there need to be a conversation in between, or we could be in the same place. So thank you.
Chair Jackson, before I
Yes.
leave, can I remind you I won't be here at the November board meeting because the Court of Common Pleas has requested my presence.
Yes. I see.
I will not be present either, but Mr. Ferg is going to take up the helm for Ms. Baker Marsh and myself.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, discuss challenges for the future Inspector General. So I'm going to assume that since our last meeting, each of you had the opportunity to have a conversation with Robert Berg. Okay. So in his conversation with me, he made this request. He said, I'd like to hear back from the board, from their personal perspective. What do you think the 3 greatest challenges, what would they be for the Inspector General in the first year of his or her time with us or in the job? And so what I wanted to do today was just, and I'm not going to try to write them down, I'm going to rely on Colleen, that if you have a thought, and even if you have a thought, if others want to say, oh, yes, to kind of give me an idea of how many people, I'm not going to take a vote or anything. He only said 3, so I don't plan on sending him 11, or more. And I'll just, using my judgment, listen to and watch the nodding of heads, et cetera, to determine those 3. But, if it's 5, it'll be 5. So is there anyone who wants to start? Yes. Yes, I'm sorry.
I was thinking he's going to have many challenges, but I thought as soon as he gets started, and I've had questions from different individuals about the Civilian Review Board, and there are some individuals who place a lot of faith in the change that this board may bring about, and some who have no faith in this board, and some who have no idea what an Inspector General is. And I've tried to just explain about the Inspector General. I mean, they can tune in and find out. But I think what they are going to have to do, one of the most important things, is to, and for lack of a better word, to advertise themselves, to let the citizens of Columbus know who they are and what they're going to be doing. They need to gain the trust, and they need to gain the trust and to let them know what their function is and what they're going to be doing for them. And they also need to gain the trust of the individual Columbus police officers so that the citizens and the officers know that when a grievance occurs, that they're going to get a fair shake, that as to the individual officers, it isn't going to be a gotcha situation, that they're going to be listened to, and to the citizens, that there's going to be a fair and a thorough and a real investigation. I think that he or she, they have to get out there and be known. And then another very important thing that they're going to have to do is hire investigators who are going to be truly committed to investigating. Because the investigators, I come from the Public Defender's Office, the felony unit, and the investigators were our soul. Because when we got our packets from the Columbus Police Department, we would re-interview the witnesses, but then we also went out and found our own witnesses that were not interviewed. So these investigators, they're going to have to hire their team of investigators who are not going to be lazy investigators, but who are going to go out there and do the job. Because what they bring back to the Inspector General will be very important. They could miss witnesses who could really be vital. So that job is going to be very important, I think.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. The next person? Oh, there.
Well, first of all, I want to agree with what Ms. Mary said, specifically about the community needs to be aware that this office exists, and we do need to advertise to them. And I think maybe in our first meeting or our second meeting, we had a conversation about not advertising or something like that, or it was brought up, I forget where. But either way, so I agree with what she was saying about that purpose. My 2 points that I'll kind of lump into one, the first thing that I see is I do foresee a barrier of cooperation with the office. I think that introducing new things is scary to people. I think there could be an issue of cooperating from the police side and, like she said, the citizen side as well. And then I also foresee bureaucracy creating new barriers that weren't previously seen. And so being able to navigate them, there's always something new popping up, something that we weren't aware of, something that wasn't previously there. So I think those things could definitely impede the work that the Inspector General is going to do.
Okay, thank you. Other input?
I'll chime in. So I agree with what they were both saying. I think one of the initial challenges, though, is because this is a brand new office and it's going to be a brand new position, is building up a team from scratch and establishing that team and making sure that the team is competent as well as transparent as well as approachable in all of the work that they do, and that they are all in alignment with the goals and the mission of that office. I think before we get to the investigation side, it's making sure that he or she or they have the right people in place to do the work of the office and to build it up. Once everybody is on one accord, then probably also simultaneously is getting the trust of the public as well as the police department, and letting them know that they are going to be doing thorough investigations and that everybody will have an opportunity to hear heard and have a fair investigation. And I think also another big one, and I don't know if it was mentioned or not, but is also navigating the politics of the city, because this is going to be a very high profile position. The media is going to come after them. People are going to have their expectations, and they're going to need to navigate all of that. And so if I were to sum up the three, it would be building out the office and the team that is transparent, competent, and approachable, navigating the politics of the city, and then building trust with both the police department and law enforcement, public safety, as well as the community.
Thank you.
I believe that adequate training is a key component for the Inspector General, even with hiring his or her own team. Adequate training being able to interpret the laws, being able to interpret the policies and procedures, the rules and regulations, the do's and don'ts when investigating allegations or whatever is brought forth to the Civilian Review Board, that they understand what it is that they're investigating. Is it, a violation of the law or rules and policies? Have they had previous history of complaints or violations? Because this, like anything going through the criminal justice system, you're looking at someone's life, what they did wrong or what was right, in having adequate training. And I think the key component to that would be the interpretation of the laws and the rules and policies. Maybe have weekly or monthly training for the individuals that would be hired to work in the Inspector General's office, to make sure that they have that understanding of what it is that they're investigating, because that is key in anything. If you don't understand the law, the rules and procedures of whatever it is that that guides the officers to do their jobs, then they really don't have an understanding of what it is that they're investigating.
Thank you. Any other? Yes.
So mine are in the same vein as some of the others that have already been said, but probably just with slightly different emphasis. My number one was the challenge will be the right people. And I think the right people, as Board Member Younger mentioned earlier, are people who know what they're doing. Our office has had investigators for a number of years, and it takes a while to build that skill well. And so I think that as important as it is to hire the right person as chief inspector, it's even more so to get the right people in place who actually are doing the work on the ground, because those are the people that are going to be putting together the substance that comes in front of us. I think related to that, but my second one is this person is developing a process, and that process is going to have to be one that's got fidelity and is done with integrity. And I think that that's going to be a huge challenge for the first series of investigations that come across the chief inspector's desk. And then the last one is, as Dr. Jones said, like remaining neutral in a very highly politicized and polarizing city and time. When I had my one-on-one conversation with Mr. Byrd, I said, it can't be someone who comes out and appears to be on the side of X or Y. It's got to be someone that there can be a public confidence and trust, and so that person has to be able to do that well, because I think any left or right of that is going to come off as not being effective and genuine, and that's going to completely implode it before it starts.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, these are all great points that I completely agree with. I think what's really important is someone who has the independence and the courage, especially to navigate the politics. With a new office coming in, it's going to be extremely difficult, so you have to be able to build a team. But also someone who brings a demonstrated track record of changing practices, changing policies wherever they were before. Because I think a key part of this is someone who is going to be able to take innovative approaches to some of these challenges, to work with the Department of Public Safety more broadly, to have a definition of community safety that also is holistic. It goes beyond just policing when we talk about solving solutions to some of these challenges. So someone who has a demonstrated track record of bringing in systems changes to policies, that's somebody who you need to have, and they have to have the courage and independence and a great team to be able to implement that moving forward for the city.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I will review with Colleen, and I think pretty quickly I need to get back to Mr. Berg. I'm certainly hoping that our inability, he was aware that this was our board meeting and that I was not going to convene you before today's meeting, but also I think he's moving forward, with this process, so I want to get back to him. I'm not exactly sure how he's going to use this information, but I'll get back to him as quickly as I can. Before I move on to item 6, there are a couple of different things that I just want to talk to, with the board. At the very end of our last meeting, it dawned on me that maybe when I was referring to future trainings, et cetera, that there was a thought amongst the board that I was referring to going outside of our board meetings. Specifically, I think there was maybe even a concern about COVID, that somehow I was going, you're going to have to leave to go somewhere for additional trainings. So with the exceptions of going to the academy, and all of those groupings, I think, are 3 or 4, or your ride-alongs, it is my desire and goal to get what I kind of call the mandatory minimum trainings accomplished in our meetings and before the inspector, we hope that the Inspector General might be in place by January 1, but again, he or she will then have to immediately begin doing a number of the things that, we've talked about. We've even talked about that time period. So in my mind, it's by our March meeting that everything, again, the kind of mandatory minimum. That does not mean that we will not have additional, whether you call it trainings or educational experiences. As a matter of fact, in just a minute or two, I'm going to share with you my thoughts around some initial committees, and that would certainly be one of the committees. But I want to come back to what I see in terms of what still needs to be done. So again, in November, we've talked about Mr. Furby from the City Attorney's Office kind of providing what is needed around constitutional, statutory, et cetera. And I do work with this team between board meetings, and so I had a meeting, again, with members of the City Attorney, again, just going through the ordinance. What does the ordinance say we must do? So in that area, I see what's left is de-escalation, DEI, cultural competency. There's one missing. Cultural implicit bias is a part of that. So right now, I'm working with, is that a 3-hour meeting, or maybe is it 2 meetings? You could take those topics and have 2-day sessions. Many of you may have already gone through some of those. So that's one. We've not identified the de-escalation, when and where that would occur. And then just now, literally, as we were going through the bylaws, and so I don't know if through the ABCs of policing or through the actual training at the academy, these items will be discussed, because in the bylaws, it talks about instructions in police tactics, may include but not limited to use of force. I mean, again, it's in the bylaws. There are several things. So I still will need to figure out if we've covered that by what is coming up. But I wanted to be clear with you that no, it's not my expectations that you will have to have additional meetings with individuals around, again, this first part of the training. If any of you feel that there's a topic that it's very important that we get trained on sooner rather than later, please reach out to me to let me know that. But you've seen what we've had, and you know where we're going. And again, I would say this is just the basic. So then I'm going to switch and share with you my thoughts around committees, but these are my thoughts. I welcome input from the board members. You might readily see where you think another committee needs to be added, and immediately. So I call the first one training and education. So we've talked about the training and why education. So a couple of topics have come up from board members. One was around how do you conduct an investigation. Another one was around arbitrations. Those are topics that, from my perspective, we may want to hear more about them. But it's not so much, a training. And there may be several topics that you want to hear more about. So there's this balancing act for me, what's kind of mandatory versus we want to hear, more about them. The next one would be rules and regulations. Certainly a very important committee a nominating committee going forward. And then we know that we have to create the standards of professionalism. So those are the 4 that I've identified that are needed right now. Of course, we can add, more. If, as we sit here today, you have a thought about an additional committee, please share it with me. And then this is what I would like. Colleen does a great job of getting maybe the draft minutes just come to me. So I would like for you to think about those 4 areas. Again, training, education, rules and regulations, nominating, standards of professionalism. Where would you like to serve? I am thinking that a committee will be between 3 and 5, typically more 3 and not 5, but we've got enough committees for every board member, to work, on one. I need for you to share your thoughts about where you want to serve with me, because at least this initial time, I'm going to need to go through and make assignments of chairs and committee members, and I would like to be able to announce it at the November meeting. So again, please reach out to me. It can be a text, it can be a call. So there are no missions at this point that go with this work, or even a description of the work. The committee is going to have to define, that. But I really would like for you to get back to me within 7 to 10 days in terms of your thoughts about where you would like to serve. And again, there will be other opportunities for other work. So I would say, just from my listing of those, we've heard several times our role in the community. Well, that's not maybe there yet. So is that a separate committee for that to be defined? But this, I think, is just the first start. Any questions about what I've just shared? Yes.
I have a question about what a couple people have brought up about making the community aware that the Inspector General exists. Is that its own committee? Is that something that we should take charge of, or is that something that once the office has been hired that they should take charge of?
I think that we would need to have that person in place. And I am sure that Mr. Berg talked about a year, but in most hiring cases, you've got the 30, 60, 90-day plan. And I would say that I probably would also reach out to resources in the mayor's office around, use the term advertise. And I don't know if it's I would probably say marketing, but how can we get that, done? But I would say that would occur much closer to when he or she is in place. Okay?
To that point, I think beyond just the Inspector General, I think it potentially warrants something around a community engagement committee. I don't know if it needs to be its own committee, but I do think something to make sure that there's always our eyes on that piece as a part of our role as a board. It can either be a separate committee or something else, or a role within our committees, but I think it is important for us to think about.
I absolutely agree with you. And so I am adding the 5th one right now, and I'm simply calling it community engagement. So that's 5, community engagement. I think so important. So thank you. Okay, now back to the agenda. And this is the request of your board chair. I am asking the board to accept my recommendation that your vice chair, at least from now until elections next April, would be Brooke Burns. I have worked with Brooke, as you know, at the Safety Advisory Commission. She chaired a very important committee, and I don't want to say it's a matter of comfort, but I would be pleased to have her as a partner, as a vice chair for the remainder of this year. So I think I would first need to ask from members of the board, would there be any objection to that?
No objection.
Okay. Then could I get a motion from a board member?
I don't know what to say. I don't know what the proper way to say it is. I second that emotion. Yeah.
So you are moving that Brooke Burns will serve as our vice chair until the end of this term. And again, our term goes to, I guess, March 31. So that would be the motion. Move. Second? Second. Any questions or concerns? All in favor of Brooke Burns serving as our vice chair, please raise your hand. There's one abstention I see. Thank you, and I am thrilled to be working with you. Thank you. Oh, and again, for the record, because I didn't do this earlier, let the record reflect that all board members are present at today's meeting. Okay. It's break time. I think it's 3:15. Let's reconvene at 3:30.
Wonderful. Congrats.
It's now 3:30. I will reconvene the meeting. At this time on the agenda, we're going into the ABCs of policing, and I believe that Commander Lang is with us. And so, Commander Lang, are you first going to address us and maybe introduce us to everyone who's with you?
Yes, ma'am. So, Chair Jackson, members of the board, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share with you a little bit about the training that we provide at the Division of Police. My name is Mark Lang. I'm currently assigned to the Training Bureau. And the training that we give new police officers is 7 months long. So there's a lot of stuff that we cover in 7 months. So this is the ABCs of policing. It is not A through Z. There will be a lot of things that we won't get to talk about today that we teach officers. That being said, we're happy to answer all of those questions, whether that's today, whether that's in the future. We're happy to help out with that. Some of the things that we focus on in this presentation are things like physical force and de-escalation and the legal requirements behind those things. We focus on those things because those are the things that people ask us so many questions about. People ask far fewer questions about how do we take a report, but they ask a lot of questions about these things. So I brought with me some experts, some of the trainers from the Police Academy, Lieutenant Justin Coleman, Officer Rick Hanna, and Sergeant Chris Cheatham. These are folks that do training for us on a daily basis. They train a number of different topics, but they focus on these community education pieces and some of the physical training that we do. So they really are the experts when it comes to how we do it and why we do it. And I'll turn it over, starting with Officer Rick Hanna, to get us started today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander. Welcome, everybody. Like Commander said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go over the ABCs of policing, just kind of reiterate what he just said. Most of this is use of force based. This class has been going on for a number of years. Officer Tommy Page taught this for many, many years, and he's kind of condensed it to where do we get the most questions about police? Where do we get the most discussion about police? So a lot of it is use of force related. I want this class to be interactive. So please raise your hand, ask questions, let's have discussions. Maybe we can clear some things up, come to an understanding or an agreement on things. But that's what this is based on. Very interactive if we can. I don't want it to be where we just talk to you guys and we say that's how it is and that's how we teach. That's not where we're coming from. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, good. That's me again. The commander introduced me, but of course I got to have my own picture. So, because I teach this alone often, or I'll bring one of the staff members with me. I'm born and raised in New Jersey. I came here to go to the Ohio State University. I graduated from there. I met the love of my life there. She's from Cincinnati, but we made Columbus our home. We absolutely love this place. I've been here for many years. Our kids go to high school here. So we don't plan on leaving. So Columbus is my home. I've been with the division for 22 years. Like the commander said, I'm assigned to the Training Bureau. My actual title is the Community Education Officer. So I go out to community groups, businesses, churches, whatever it is. People request types of training that we do, which I'll do ABCs of policing. I do all the active shooter training for civilians. It's called CRAZE, Civilian Response to Active Shooter Events. We do civilian self-defense. We'll get into a couple more things that we do. And I was put on there that I was a United States Marine Corps veteran. Very proud of that. Is there any veterans in the room? There you go. There you go. You devil dog? There we go. See, we're going to do fine, Sarge. See, he was nervous. There we go. So thank you for your service, sir. Go ahead. So I'm going to jump right into it, kind of get out in front of things a little bit. You're the Civilian Review Board. This is something that we've been reviewed on since 1999, which is CALEA. CALEA has, you can see it goes up to 2017, and maybe the commander could shed some light on this, but because of COVID, it slowed down the last accreditation process. I think we haven't been accredited since 2020, where they started the process and then they had to stop because of COVID.
They switched from a 3-year cycle to a 4-year cycle. So we're still on track, but the accrediting body delayed a year how they do it.
And just the commander said, it's a 3-year cycle. They come in and review our best practices. Some of the goals that we try to attain or we try to achieve with CALIA accreditation is to strengthen crime prevention and control capabilities. We'll formalize essential management procedures, establish fair and non-discriminatory personal practices, improve the service of our delivery to the citizens, solidify interagency cooperation and coordination, and increase community and staff confidence in the agency. Okay, they don't just pass these off. I don't know off the top of my head how many agencies in the United States are accredited, but I know it's a very difficult process. Where they come in, we have to be very transparent, and we open up the books to them. And they tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And if we meet their standards, we get the gold star, we get the accreditation. Am I right in saying that, sir? Okay. So what we teach here, Sergeant Cheatham and myself, we work at the Defensive Tactics Unit. So we wear a lot of different hats there with the recruits and the officers, with cadets and with Public Safety Corps. We're working a lot with a lot of different groups. And some of the things that we do in our unit is we do 70 hours of defensive tactics training for every recruit class that comes through. You'll see subject control there. That's all hands-on stuff. Hands-on subject control. That includes boxing and wrestling and jiu-jitsu and a lot of different stuff. We integrate various disciplines so we can get better at that stuff. When I went through the police academy 22 years ago, and the commander was in my class, we just did boxing and wrestling, right? And it just has evolved and evolved and evolved to make it better and better and safer for the officer and for the citizens. Civilian self-defense, groups request us, we come out, we teach a lot of situational and environmental awareness to people, and then we do some hands-on stuff with them. We do stress to them that we're not going to make a mixed martial artist in an 8-hour class. It just doesn't happen. But if we can get them to pay attention more when they're out and about, not carrying their cell phones across 4 lanes of traffic on High Street, being better at situational aware, recognizing situations and getting out of those situations before something bad can happen. So we do a lot of that stuff. Officer phase training, which we're doing now, we do it constantly. We're in our second phase of training with the officers. We're now almost at a quarterly cycle with the officers are coming in about every 4 months. And they're doing de-escalation and subject control training right now. They're doing building search training right now. We see a trend, we add it, we get to it right away. We train all of the officers. They go through it. We do all the taser and impact weapons, de-escalation training, and then stress inoculation. I've been a football coach and a wrestling coach for many years. And what I always tell my players and my athletes are, make your mistakes on the practice field. Make your mistakes in the mat room when we're practicing. Don't make them on game day. Does that make sense to everybody? We stress that to our recruits. We stress that to our officers. I said that to a veteran officer yesterday because she was upset with herself because she did poorly on a search. And I said, hey, you make your mistake here in this building. Don't make it out there, okay? So we do introduce a lot of stress inoculation. A lot to these recruits, because as you can see there on the screen, it says that the recruits cannot execute in a controlled environment. What are the chances they will be able to execute in unpredictable environments on the street? Okay, so we put a lot of stock in that. We're going to jump into use of force definitions. Legal, tactical, and ethical decisions regarding force should be based on state and federal law. We're going to touch on some Supreme Court and some circuit court cases that specifically deal with use of force with policing in America that we follow, specifically the 4th and the 14th Amendment. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So on de-escalation training, okay, because we're doing that right now. We do it, we've never stopped doing it. When I was in the academy 22 years ago, and these gentlemen here, we've never not done this. We've always done de-escalation training in one form or another. It's a hot topic now, so we ramped it up. The community wants more de-escalation. We ramped up even more. Okay, so our officers are going through that right now as we speak in very intense stress inoculation type scenarios where there's a lot of decision making. Where if we could talk somebody down, we could build a rapport with them. Great. But here's the thing, we don't always have the opportunity to de-escalate. The opportunity has to present itself, and if it does, we will absolutely take advantage of that. If it does not, then we have to choose another path. So a couple of types, there's the definition of de-escalation, and that's our goal at Columbus Police. De-escalation to gain voluntary compliance in subjects, when feasible, and minimize or eliminate the use of reasonable physical force. Reasonable is the key word there, but it's reasonable. Two types of de-escalation. You have tactical, and then you have verbal. Okay, on the tactical side of things, we use our tactics, we use our tools, and our techniques that allow officers to make a scene safer so they can begin verbal de-escalation. There's a scenario that we're doing with our officers right now, and I always reference back to their first aid training, okay? Where they got to run into a room and they're dealing with a shooting suspect. The guy's on the ground, he has been shot in the chest, somebody is over the top of them doing chest compressions, okay? And then, so the officers are just running in, okay? And they're running in right away and they're trying to do chest compressions to help it out. And I keep reminding them, you have to slow it down. You got to slow it down. We got to make the scene safe. It says it on every single slide of our first aid training that we had. Make the scene safe, make the scene safe, make the scene safe. So you're going to see our officers out there on the street doing that. You're going to see them go into an environment and they're going to be loud with verbal commands. Sir, I need you to come to me. Turn around, face away from me, walk backwards to the sound of my voice. But I live here. You don't understand. Just please, it's like the game Simon Says, come to me. We need you to come out of this building so we can make this scene safe. And then we're able to do what we have to do. That's an example of verbal de-escalation and tactical de-escalation. My uniform is a form of de-escalation. Utilizing a taser and putting that dot on somebody is a form of de-escalation. Any tool or tactic that I can use where I can use the minimal amount of force, I'm going to utilize that. Those are examples of tactical de-escalation. Other examples are distance, cover, and concealment. We stress this with our officers and our recruits, specifically with the training that we're doing now. Okay, we have a scenario where we tell the officers they're going into a situation where there's a man with a knife who threatened all of his employees, and he's still in there, and now he's cutting himself. Blow the whistle, go. The first thing that we want, yes, sir.
To a point you just made where you said that your uniform is a point of de-escalation. Can you explain that, please?
Sure. Sarge, you want to jump on that?
Yes, just the fact that, that our uniforms are there at the scene and the police are there, we hope that we will gain compliance just by the fact that we're at scene. That people will comply, and so that it doesn't raise the level of people getting hurt.
A lot of times, again, thank you all for having us here today and allowing us the opportunity for this. One thing that we wanted to share at the beginning as well was this is presented to
Mayor's Council, Commission.
Citizen groups, classes that come in for Citizen Police Academy classes and things like that. So we hit all kinds of things in normally a 4-hour time frame and window. So a lot of times we're kind of condensing it down for this particular group. I know many of you have been through that before. So please ask us questions. Uniform in terms of presence from there of a de-escalation. A lot of times we talk about the types of runs that we go to. They can be anything from I'm locked out of a car to somebody's in a store, a restaurant, whatever it is, there's a disturbance, there's a fight, there's something going on. Many times, say we'll take Kroger. A lot of times an individual can be fighting with an individual at Kroger, security is there. When we get there as the Columbus Division of Police, a uniformed officer, right, that is readily viewed as, okay, that's something different than maybe a loss prevention officer or something like that. A lot of times just being us there in uniform, that individual sees that, oh, it's the police, and it kind of calms everything down. Everybody stops yelling at each other, and they look to us then to help direct and utilize anything from there to help get around the situation. That can be a form of, when we show up in uniform, cruiser, right, people say, oh, the police are here. Okay, everybody take a step back, let's take a breath. Now we can start fighting and figuring things out. That could be an example. Yep.
Good, so I'll just go ahead and pick up on this. If you go back one for me, please. Thank you. Some more examples of a tactical approach of de-escalation is distance, cover, and concealment. Okay, so We stress to our officers that when it's reasonable or when it's applicable, if they can find cover and they can create distance to manage a situation. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes you're just in the situation, you're out in the middle of the street, and you got nothing. You got no cover. But we constantly train our officers that if they can find a point of cover, create some distance, then we're able to slow things down, and then we can de-escalate. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, and then right there is this, on that slide, it says the number of officers on scene may increase available options and increase the ability to reduce the overall enforced use. We've done this my entire career. We call it strength in numbers. If I can bring more officers with me, then I could potentially use less force if I need to.
And it always doesn't have to be something that is force-related, right? If we get into an accident and we're responding on the freeway, if we can bring 3 to 4 to 5 more officers there and cruisers, we can start shutting down means of egress and ingress to that area, right? If we have a school incident and we want to utilize one entry point and help with containment on the building, the more officers we get there to be able to help out with that. The more people there, the more jobs we can look for, and then the kind of progression through either containing or assisting with a particular incident can greatly increase.
Sir.
So first of all, thanks so much. How do you balance that with, prioritization of other places that police need to be at, balancing with force and numbers? Is there a number of, we've got this under control versus now we've got to divert resources elsewhere? How do you kind of balance some of that?
Usually.
So it's more of a management question there, but yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because we talk about that from a management perspective is, hey, there's other work to be done. So the goal is you send the folks there, you get the situation immediately handled, and then they can go off to the next run. So leave the minimal amount of people necessary to do the paperwork and continue to process the scene, but send as many people as we need up front just to get it under control. And ideally, that happens relatively quickly so that we can then move on to the next step.
Yep. A lot of it helps at the beginning for prioritization in our priority call sheets, right? Or call runs. We have runs that are priority 1 all the way down to priority 4 or 5s, right? So that can be an initial how you dispatch. We have a 17, which is the domestic violence. That is automatically at least a 2-officer priority call, right? Our shootings and some of the other instances like that are all the officers that are available or clear and close in that area that can go and respond, whether it be a zone concept or pulling from other zones to assist from there. Large-scale incidences that require a lot of officers in one area, we'll pull from other zones if we have to at the time. But like the commander said, trying to then figure out exactly who needs to do what. Looking for work is one of the things that I like to use. And then everybody that doesn't have work, they leave and they start assisting on the other priorities that are holding from there. Yes, sir.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I want to make sure that I get my question in before we.
Good role for a pastor.
Well, in one play I was in, I played the devil. So
okay, he can do that.
You guys, and once again, we thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today. You said that your uniform can be a symbol of de-escalation, but I know we got a lot of years right here sitting up in front of us. Have there been times in your career when your uniform became a form of escalation?
That's a very good question, and it's a very good point to bring up that, yes, it can be. I'll tell you that right now. But that point of escalation, at times, it depends on the individuals and the situation that you're dealing with, and it could be, if when we show up, is that when now people decide to up their level of whatever it is towards somebody else. Many times we will show up, it might be an argument between neighbors, right? As soon as we get there, that argument goes from the arguing verbally back and forth to now, for some reason, these individuals are out and they're pushing, shoving, and it escalates with the officers showing up because they now know that, okay, something's going to happen. I can now go out and do this particular thing, and then it's going up from there. Escalation could be where you could show up, ask somebody some questions. Maybe somebody got called in that's around the Greyhound, right? They're having some sort of personal issue or something like that they're dealing with. An officer can get there. They're not doing anything that's illegal. They say, I'm fine, leave me alone. 3, 4, 5 more officers could show up, and now that can be an escalation of, it appears that we're going to utilize force, or that now we're pouring in, directing all of these uniforms to this one, the guy, the individual just wants to be left alone or go about their whatever is going on with not a legal means to it. You can have escalation, appearance of escalation because of the numbers that show up from there. And that has come back from having that direct dialogue for others. Why do you guys always have so many people show up, right? You always, we look at high school football games. We have officers show up, and then a lot of people, if something happens, will show up in terms of, somebody said, well, nothing was going on until the police officers all showed up. Well, they didn't know why we were initially called, and what they saw was us arriving there, and then all of a sudden, everything kind of got out of hand, but because the individuals that were there decided to have that happen. So that appearance could be there, and we kind of break that down with direct communication and making sure that we follow up after the fact of exactly what happened.
And I've experienced it on both sides. I've had people upset with us because we have so many officers at scene. And then I've had a lot of people thank us for having so many officers at scene. I'm glad you showed up so quickly. I'm glad so many of you came for this. It really ended quickly when you got here. Then I've had others say, why do so many of you have to be there? Don't you have anything better to do? So it goes both ways. As far as the uniform, that seems to be a question that's come up a couple times. We're in the training bureau, and we train our officers to take pride in their uniform, to take care of their uniform, because it represents the Columbus Division of Police and the city of Columbus. And hopefully, our presence at scene, more often than not, will de-escalate the situation.
Sure.
Quick follow-up to that. So, how does this also kind of go into the different types of alternative responses in terms of, especially if it's a mental health situation or situation there, whether there's conversations around social workers or others who are involved? Like, how does that relate to how some of these incidents gets responded to, as you relate to either coming in with police or others saying, hey, let's actually divert that elsewhere, who can handle that particular situation? How does that work out?
So I'm in patrol, and I'm probably the one that is the closest or the most linked in with current alternatives to just a uniformed response, cruiser district, officer sending on the way. Our medical care unit, our medical response unit, MCR unit, has been one of the things that we've been tracking and looking at with the response to mental health crisis, or those that are potentially in having a mental health crisis. And I can tell you right now, they have done a phenomenal job of getting there and using clinicians on the spot right now to maybe reach some of the databases, some of the other information that they can use to kind of work with the patient or the client that they're currently talking with, and some of the options that myself, as just a regular patrol officer, I might know what NetCare can offer, but I might not know what Ohio Health and some of the other agencies that are there, social services, can do. And that clinician being right there with us is phenomenal to be able to make that link prior to. We're still sending a uniformed officer with them. We have changed the uniform a little bit, right, to look a little bit more like a clinician, to make it look a little bit more comfortable like we do with our training environment. They're still driving a Columbus Division of Police car. They are still marked as a Columbus Division of Police uniform. They have an exterior vest carrier. They have their badges. They have their guns. They have all the things that you see on us today, but they're with a clinician, and so we're directing resources first. We had an incident like that where we had an individual that was barricaded in his house, and the officers went first because of the type of situation, but once it was calmed down, we brought the clinicians up with his MCU handler, and they were able to take it over from there once we were able, like Officer Hannah initially said, to make sure the scene is safe and then go and progress from there. The radio room, how we dispatch and when, is also going through some changes. They're looking at direct individuals there being able to take and direct calls for service to other social service groups, or other resources. We used to take accidents all the time, and we'd have to show up for a non-injury accident, and people would wait, and that would pull resources from something else. We're doing a direct telephone, TRU, telephone reporting unit right now. We're doing a lot of telephone reporting units for incidences that officers do not have the ability to follow up with right now, to kind of help better direct our uniformed presence of responding to certain things, along with the MCR units as well. Yep.
Good. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. Now we're on to verbal de-escalation. Verbal de-escalation is the use of words to reduce and heighten emotional and physical state in order to facilitate calm and rational interaction. It is the gift of the gab, and not everybody has it when they come through the police academy, but through thousands and thousands of repetitions, they develop it, and we continue to help them develop it. Say this is a good idea. Let's talk about what would trigger this person, or what would help this person, how to build a rapport in a better way. Officers should attempt verbal de-escalation only when it's safe to do so. Okay, so that's very important, is the safety of our officers, and you can see there in the safety of bystanders. We teach the officers to ensure that other officers and bystanders are safe from immediate harm before attempting verbal de-escalation. Okay, we can't put it the other way around. We make the scene safe. Like I said, it kind of always comes back to that first aid slides that we had. We want to make the scene safe as fast as possible, and then we can start working on whether it be our verbal or tactical de-escalation tactics. Okay, so we're going to do a scenario here. I'm going to turn this over to Sergeant Cheatham, and this is where we get a little bit interactive, and we're going to need some volunteers to help out with this. We have some props, and I'll let Sarge go ahead and explain that.
Okay, we're going to start with the premise that citizens are required by law to abide by lawful order of a police officer, and that if the citizen doesn't believe that that's a lawful order, there are many ways of remedying that after the fact, and in the time, that's not the time to do it. We also know that we have to enforce the law as police. We don't make the law, but we enforce the law. And there are people who do not want to comply with the law, and who do not want to cooperate when the time comes to be held accountable for violating the law. So we start off with that. Raise your hand if you think an officer has to wait to be shot at to shoot their gun. Anybody? Okay, raise your hand if you think an officer has to wait to be struck before we strike somebody. Okay, good. We train our officers, and this is based on force science and other studies, that it takes the human mind a third of a second to see a threat, react to the threat, and respond to the threat. A third of a second, all right? So there's a delay there. Just because we see the threat coming doesn't mean we're going to immediately recognize it and be able to respond. Has anybody ever heard that before? There's a few of you who've been through our class with it. And you've been through it, right? Okay. Have you been through it? Okay. Got it. Anybody else been through our class? Because I'm going to do some demo. That's right. Mr. Jackson, you've been through it too. Okay, so if you've been through it before, I'm going to ask that you not volunteer, but I need 3 volunteers to stand up. Stand up right now if you can help me out here. I want to prove the point. All right, thank you. Here's one. Can I get 2 more?
There has to be 2 other people.
Come on, board members.
You're out. Okay, 3 of you come over here. Since you were the first to stand up, could you come out here with me? All right. Okay, so I just told you it takes the human mind a third of a second to see a threat, react to the threat, and respond to the threat. Okay? Now this isn't necessarily a threat, but I want to prove my point of how you can't recognize something right away. Would you put your hands like this for me? Okay. I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to poke him in the chest. Okay? I want you to stop. Okay? That doesn't seem too hard, right? I'm telling him I'm going to poke it. I'm going to poke his chest. I want him to knock my hand away. You can knock it away as hard as you want. You can dislocate my elbow. I don't care. Just knock it away. Okay? All right, here we go. Ready? Okay. Did I touch your chest every time? Yeah. You knew I was going to do it, right? Okay. Thank you. If you could stand, ma'am, could you come here, please? I do this a little different with the ladies. Okay, put your hands on top of mine. facing down. Now, we're gonna play the game that most of us played with our kids at one time, right? I'm gonna slap the hands, okay? I want her to stop me from slapping the hands. Okay, ready? Ready? Come on, stop it. Okay, all right, so I made that point, all right? So even though she knows I'm going to do it, and I actually had a little bit of repetition there on how I was going to do it, she couldn't stop me from slapping the top of her hands, and he couldn't stop me from poking him in the chest, all right? Because there's a delay, all right? There's a delay. Now we're going to take it up a notch. But before I do it, so if I'm standing within arm's reach of a citizen, and that citizen blades their body and balls up their fist, if I'm that close to them, am I going to be able to stop them from hitting me? Is there any way I can stop them unless I create some distance? No, I can't, okay, because my mind cannot process that quickly, all right? And we teach our recruits, we teach our officers to look for those cues, for those danger cues, those bodily cues where somebody blades their body, balls up their fist, or what they're saying, how they're behaving, all right? Are they getting more and more agitated? And if that's the case, we have to take some sort of action. Hopefully the action is to take a step back, get offline, something like that. But sometimes that opportunity isn't there. Every situation is different. But we have to teach our officers that that is a possibility, that the chance that they could get hit in that situation is real. All right? Now, if I could get, sir, you to stay, and Rick, would you take the other two out, and I need my props.
Let's say you go.
The props in here? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just stay right there if you will. All right, these are blue handle training guns, all right? The reason they're painted blue is because the firing pins have been removed. So even if I were to load these with ammunition, they would not fire, okay? Just so you know, I'll pass these around and everybody can see, ma'am. Take a look at it. I should have done this before the others went out of the room. I should have. We use those in training, those and other models of guns in training as well. Mac, you probably use those many times through the years, right? Good. All right, if you would stand right here. Take the gun. Pull the trigger a few times. Okay, what is your first name? Aaron. Aaron, you are a police officer responding to a robbery in progress at a bank. Okay? This is the door of the bank. You've exited your cruiser. You're walking towards the bank. Your gun's in hand, as it should be. It's a robbery in progress. All right? I'm the robber leaving the bank. Right? Cop robber. I want you to do what you think a police officer should do in this situation. Okay? The scenario will begin when I touch the podium. The podium's the door. Okay? Do what you think an officer should do. You ready? When I touch the podium, I'm coming out of the bank. Okay?
Freeze. So I was supposed to shoot you?
Are you?
I mean,
Okay, sit down. We'll have a big discussion on this, okay? Next. You did good. Okay, sir, these two blue hammer guns are training guns, right? They're painted blue because the firing pins are removed, so you know if I loaded them with ammunition, they wouldn't fire anything, but I want you to see that both of them are empty. Are you comfortable with these? Yes. Okay. Go ahead and pull the trigger a few times. Okay, stand right here. Face me. What is your first name? Charles. Charles and Chris. Charles, you are a police officer responding to a robbery in progress at a bank. This is the door to the bank. You've exited your cruiser, you're walking towards the bank, your gun's in hand, as it should be, because it's a robbery in progress. Okay? I'm the robber leaving the bank. Cop robber. Okay? I want you to do what you think a police officer should do in this situation. Okay? The scenario will begin when I touch the podium. All right? When I touch the podium, I'm walking out. Here we go. Stop. Hold. Get your hands up. Thank you for volunteering. These are blue handle training guns, okay? The firing pins have been removed, so even if I loaded them with real ammunition, they wouldn't fire. All right, just so you know, I want you to be comfortable with what we're doing. Okay. Are you comfortable? Okay, so close it up. Going to pull the trigger a few times, just so you know how it works. If you can stand right over here, please, and face me. What is your first name?
Marty.
Marty?
Yes.
Okay, nice to meet you, Marty. Come a little closer. Good. Okay, Marty, you are a police officer responding to a robbery in progress at a bank. This is the door to the bank. You've exited your cruiser, your gun's in your hand as it should be because it's a robbery in progress. We're walking towards the bank. I'm the robber leaving the bank. All right, cop robber. All right?
Okay.
I want you to do what you think a police officer should do in this situation. The scenario will begin when I touch the podium. When I touch the podium, I'm walking through the doors of the bank. Okay? All right, here we go. You ready?
Okay.
Okay.
Tell you to stop? I mean, yes.
Okay. All right. Just stay up here for me.
Okay.
All right. So, thank you to my 3 volunteers. Can we get a round of applause for them? Here. Sir, you didn't shoot at all. Can I ask why not?
I didn't feel compelled to shoot you
Okay. Okay. Can I ask why not?
because I'm not, my mind doesn't go to shoot someone, I guess.
So you were hoping I would comply,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
But also more about me just not wanting to shoot you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand that. I don't want to shoot anybody either.
Yeah.
To be honest. Okay. All right. Sir, you shot. Who shot first? Me or Mr. Reverend Tatum? I did.
Yes,
I did.
you did.
It was close though, right?
Yes.
It was almost a tie. Would you agree it was almost a tie? But it wasn't a tie, was it?
No.
Let's say it was a tie. Is a tie good in a gunfight?
No.
No. The tie's not good in a gunfight. Okay. Ma'am, you didn't shoot at all. Can I ask why not?
No, I just got it stuck in my head that it's a scenario, so I'm trying to figure out what to do through the scenario.
Okay. So, so you just couldn't process that because of this. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna give you another chance. All right. You want to try it again?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. When I touch the podium, the snare, I'll be exiting the bank, okay? The snare begins when I touch the podium. Are you ready?
Yep. Sir, put your hands up. Put your upper gun. Got me first. Yep.
You didn't shoot that better.
No. Oh, I tried, but it just didn't click, so.
All right. All right, thank you. All right. You want to have a seat? Mac, come on up here.
Oh, sorry.
Mac, the snare begins when I touch the podium. You ready? Okay. Did I point the gun at you?
Nope.
Nope. Did I fire a shot at you?
No.
All right. Let's change the snare. Let's do it one more time. You ready? Okay. Snare begins when I touch the podium. You ready?
Ready?
What'd you do there?
Shot you again?
Shot me in the back, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Could I have shot you first?
Could you have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Snare begins when I touch the podium. You ready?
Yep.
Try it again?
Yep.
Snare begins when I touch the podium. You ready?
Yep.
Is the tie good in the gunfight?
Nope.
What's the headline in the story, in the newspaper tomorrow?
Officer shoots suspect in the back.
Officer shoots suspect in the back. Right. Now, I want you to keep in mind, this scenario that we run is absent any cover. Okay? He's out in the open. All right? Now, if we throw cover in there, now what's cover? Can somebody tell me what cover is? What would be an example of cover?
Where you're protecting yourself from being shot at.
Okay, so like a physical example, give me an example if you would.
Behind the car.
Behind the car, not just any part of the car though, what part of the car? Because bullets can go through a car.
Yeah.
So the engine block of a car. Would be behind a wall, would that be cover? Would this wall right here be covered?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because it would go right through the wall.
Right, because it's probably driveway to the side of this panel, right? Right? But behind a big tree in front of the bank, would that be covered?
Yes.
Okay. In this situation, I put our four volunteers in. I put them in a situation where there's no cover, but the vast majority of police shootings happen within 6 feet. 6 feet, close. So we have to prepare our people for this reality. Now, do we want to encourage our people to shoot? No. We want to encourage our people to look for danger cues, to look for everything situational, right? And understand that action beats reaction. That the third of a second principle is in place whether it involves guns or fists or feet or rocks or whatever. Ball bats, all right? We have to prepare our people for that reality. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no.
So, when you originally said you hop out the car, you see the robber exit the bank, right? So, I guess in my head, you're across from wherever your car is parked unless you pull up right to the door. So, if there's a significant difference in space from where you are from where the perpetrator is, you said previously that, all police shootings are within 6 feet of each other. Or majority of them are 6 feet from each other. What is the purpose of you shooting at them from where your car is to the front door?
The scenario I gave for the bank, that's just the situation that you're in, okay? Obviously, we do not respond that way to a bank robbery, okay? I just kind of set the stage like that to put you in a situation where you're within 6 feet of each other and there's no cover. Does that make sense? Am I answering your question?
I don't know. It just feels like, I guess I understand what you're saying, but to the point when you asked me why I did not shoot at it or at the suspect, I guess my concern is kind of that I don't get why you're just shooting. I don't get why that is I get that you're in immediate danger, but it feels like from the small perspective of what you just presented to us, that the only right answer is to shoot. And I guess that doesn't make sense to me, and it seems kind of troubling if that is what police are being trained to do.
Mr. Thomas, I can help, I think. So this is not how they're trained to respond. So they would park down the street and try to watch, observe the bank before they walk up. The point, though, is that there could become a time where you find yourself close to someone who has the ability to hurt you, and their decision to do that, they can move faster than you can react. So the scenario is not about every tactic that we would use to respond to a bank robbery. It's about reaction time, and that they can move faster than you can react to them. So we purposely did things that we wouldn't normally do on a bank robbery just to get us to that point where you don't have a place for cover, you don't have other officers there, you didn't have an opportunity to look. But you could come to that point at any time for any type of reason. We forced it to that point just to talk about reaction time, not necessarily to talk about bank robbery responses.
And I feel like you did a better point of the first activity than the second activity. But that's my perspective.
Thank you. That's good feedback. I appreciate it.
Yeah, the reason we incorporate the gun into the scenario is because the shootings are the most high profile of all of our actions, right? And, every shooting's different, and, officers are put in situations like what I just showed you from time to time, and especially the part about shooting in the back, and the fact that, you might read a headline that say officer shot a suspect in the back, but that doesn't tell the whole story necessarily, okay? There could be a reason why they shot the suspect in the back, and that could be the reason. The officer didn't have cover. The officer wasn't at a safe distance. The officer, whatever reason, the person was shot. Maybe the person was facing, and then just as the officer pulled the trigger, the person turned away. That's why we incorporate that into the scenario. Okay, we kind of hit different levels of force. Does that make sense? It does, yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, another question.
I missed something. I think the third or the fourth scenario with Mike over there, where the scenario in the paper was going to be that he was shot in the back. How did that come about? How?
the way I set the scenario up, when I touched the podium, which meant I was exiting the door, you must not be able to see. I was like this, looking at it.
Okay.
Okay, and then he immediately shot me the first time, but when I did it again, I looked back and shot, and it was a tie. Okay, and we had
Okay.
already established that a tie isn't good in a gunfight. And I just show that part just to show why possibly an officer shot somebody in the back.
Okay, I got you.
The suspect is still a threat from here, just like the suspect's a threat from here. That's the point I was trying to make. Okay. We have Officer Michael Shannon. He's been with the Division of Police for about 17 years. When he had about 9 years on, he stopped a person about 3 o'clock in the morning in an apartment complex, and he was patting him down, and just as Officer Shannon felt the gun in the person's waistband, the person broke away and took off running. So he's chasing this person through the complex. Person pulled the gun out, shot Mike right in the leg, shattered his femur. He endured 9 surgeries, and he was out for 5 years, I think. He's back on the street now. He's actually, believe it or not, on a bicycle unit. But he rides a bicycle now on the hilltop. But that's exactly what happened to Michael Shannon.
Chris Kleitz.
Chris Kleitz, same thing. You're right. Shot and killed, just like this, in a foot chase.
And if I can add to that, by not shooting, you're allowing that perpetrator, that suspect, to decide whether he's going to shoot you or not. He may not shoot you, but he may. So, and believe me, I mean, I knew to shoot him, but this same scenario has been going on for over 30 years. And it wasn't because I'm so bright. I shot him when I was in the academy, not because I knew, but because I was scared. So I just shot him. Not that I knew what I was doing. But by not shooting, you're allowing him to decide whether you're going home, possibly that night.
Mac's exactly right. When you're both standing there and you both have the gun in your hand, get the guns back out, Rip. Well, I want to make another point. Who's ultimately in control of that situation? The police officer or the robber?
The robber.
The robber. Absolutely.
He's the one that makes the choice.
One more thing here. Rick, come over here. Rick's the robber. Okay? I'm the police officer. Point the gun at me, Rick. How many times in a movie or a television show have you seen this play out? Drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. Have you ever seen that in a movie where the police officer and the robber are face to face pointing guns at each other? Is that reality?
No.
That's not reality, but there's a lot of things that Hollywood gives us as far as the police that people think is true and it's not. And it really makes us have to play catch up all the time on what really happens, what's the reality of the situation and what's not. Does that make sense?
When you guys go out into the community, set up these scenarios to show the civilians or whoever, whatever community event you're at, at least so they can see the type of
Yes.
situations that you guys
We
come
try,
across.
and really, that goes right along with what I just said about Hollywood. We try to educate the public as to what it's really like. And that, because there's so many misunderstandings about what police work is, okay, and how the police should respond. And everybody seems to have an opinion, but, on how the police should have handled this situation or this situation. But it's a tough job. It really is. It's a very difficult job. And we are given the unique opportunity to shape our people, hopefully for success in a very difficult job, which means it's a very serious thing that Rick and I and Lieutenant Coleman do. So, yes, sir.
Question, because I don't believe that any of us have done our scenario training yet for the Civilian Review Board. And I think it was Brooke who said, because the three of us went through it as a part of the advisory commission, there will be heightened anxiety. And I think many times we were actually playing the role of the police officer. And it is eye-opening and it is beyond split second. So I just want to prepare you for that because it'll be more intense than what we saw today, unless they've changed it completely in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I think whether Aaron's point or was being brought up, I think, certainly, obviously acknowledging the situation, those scenarios, but then the very real instances in which, situations in which folks are not following necessarily training and those things that have actually happened. And I think it's important. That's why I think these conversations around these different alternatives, these different moments, so that, as you even mentioned earlier, these are the scenarios in which aren't usually handled in that way in terms of the immediate scenario at first. But so I think it's important and helpful in that context of understanding that scenario. And then also just kind of with the understanding where a lot of the mistrust in community is there are situations in which there's just not an understanding of how these things operate in real world scenarios. And because we have seen a number of high profile incidents where this has occurred and it shouldn't have happened, right? So it's that balance of both understanding that, hey, this isn't Hollywood, and then also realizing those types of situations can undermine deeper trust. So I appreciate that, but I think that is kind of where I think some of that perspective can come from, of those who might be skeptical about different approaches.
Those are three great points. And I like to utilize a word when I do a lot of these presentations, and it's three words that I think is one of the most important words that you can use. Sorry, 3 letters, and it's why. The reason that we go out to a lot of the engagements that we have and we're able to share and we want to share is because everyone, yourselves included, we have that question of why, right? And how many in this room have ever pointed or thought of utilizing a firearm or having a firearm or stopping a bank robber before being involved in that scenario of the 3, correct? And we get that a lot of times when we're speaking and we're sharing, right? We want to share our world with everyone in policing, and that's why we take this scenario to it a lot of times, because it's you don't get to come on this side very often, right? And that why gets to be answered from there. Not being able to have that discussion and sharing the why, even if it's not the thing that you want, whether what side it is, whether that information is there of what you want to hear, it's still the why behind it, right? So at least then you can then have a very, very in-depth breakdown and discussion, right? Now we know the why we're training this way or we're doing certain things. Now we can start looking at, is that the best practice that we go through? And that's what their role in training and everything from there is so critical in what they do from there. So,
And from a training perspective, our recruits, and Jeff could tell you for sure, but they spend many, many hours with Mr. Furby going over legal issues. And they spend 77 hours with my people and me, and we spend a lot of time on the Supreme Court case, Graham versus Connor. We spend a lot of time on our use of force continuum, which if anybody has a question about what that is, I'd be more than happy to explain that to you. We have a continuum that starts at the lowest level of force and reaches all the way to deadly force. And then we go to the mat room and to the boxing room. We teach them different ways to strike and kick and take people to the ground and to handcuff and keep the knee off the neck and do all that sort of thing. And then it all culminates in a altercation with one of my instructors who's wearing a Spartan suit for protection, and they're giving scenarios where they have to make decisions, and if they don't react enough, they are penalized in the grading process, and if they react too much, they go overboard. They're penalized. So it's a very difficult process to get through, and not everybody passes, But we're putting them on the spot and making them make those split-second decisions the correct way, the absolute correct way. And if they don't, then there's consequences. So, yes, ma'am.
So I just have a quick question. I was on the safety commission and we went through the training at the academy. And so I'm just curious to know the scenario that you gave Basically, Mac demonstrated very well that, you know, the response is to shoot. And Officer Hannah, you did a great job of talking about the reality of responding to situations like that. And so I'm just curious because another reality is most police encounters don't end up in a gunfight. As a matter of fact, most police officers don't discharge their weapon in the line of duty. And so I'm curious to know, do you all provide the training in proportionate to the reality that the officers are going to encounter these high profile or these dangerous events while they're actually out on the street? Because what I'm seeing, well, what I'm curious to know is, are they being conditioned? Because that is like psychological, right? When you constantly put them in a situation and then they're trained that if they don't respond in a certain way, that they'll die basically, or they will be penalized. Or are you all training them that, okay, this might be a bank robbery, but oops, he really didn't have a gun. He just happened to have a cell phone in his hand or something like that. So do you switch up the trainings every now and then so that they always are on their toes, basically?
Transitions training. We transition. We have suspects quickly pull a weapon or a non-weapon or a gun or a knife or a cell phone or a paper bag or a wallet out of their pocket, and the officers have to make quick decisions. Mac used to do that with us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the decision-making process. Has anybody here not seen our Milo machine at the academy, the interactive training tool? Okay, hopefully we'll get to show it to you when you come out. There's a ton of Milo scenarios just for what you're talking about, ma'am. The quick decision-making where you can make the proper decision. You have to quickly decipher what the threat is and react reasonably, appropriately. Yep.
We applied behavioral science training is what we do as well for the recruit level, where it's entry and calming actually is the focus of that training. It's going into a very heightened, angry situation. You're not aware of what's really going on, who has what. You're in someone's house, and the whole goal of that is actually entry inside, calming, and then you go to problem determination and then conflict resolution. And that's for an extended period of time, yes. We do from everything from force to non-force in terms of scenarios. We do that, and not just at the recruit level. We do it as we progress through as an officer as well. We're going back right now in defensive tactics, and we're going over some of the tactics that we utilize for control. But I just finished another series of training from the yearly training that we have from the academy, which talked about our rendering aid, getting resources, and other things that we utilize, keywords to get somebody to kind of calm down and take another path, or a way to kind of go a different route on certain things. So yes, ma'am, we do that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You know, for it in a future conversation would be not just us making recommendations to you about improvement, but rather you're there. And you probably have your own ideas, because certainly the training is not perfect, or what you see in community relations. You know, you have ideas about how things could be better between police and the community. And I would hope that we will have another conversation in which we get to hear some of the things that I think we, could do in the community to do a better job. You know, we used to have this. We used to have, coaching or bike patrol, whatever. We stopped that. Why did we stop it? And there's all kinds of historical reasons why we change things, or why don't we add this? So I'm hopeful, we want to get a sense of the current reality, and we want to educate the CRB, but I'm hopeful that we could have a further conversation about things that you all are seeing, that you could say, could we do these 3 or 4 things, or at least, hear your opinions about that.
So I'm so glad you said that. So the state of Ohio requires new police officers to undergo about 730 hours of training. the city of Columbus adds an additional close to 600, between 500 and 600 hours of training. So the state required training, we're required by the state to teach exactly that, and they come in, they watch, they make sure that we do it. But the city of Columbus hours, we are able to make exactly those changes. So these officers do a great job of coming to us and saying, hey, we need a scenario on getting officers to interrupt misconduct by another officer. So how can we train them to see that there's misconduct happening and stop it from happening? So those Columbus hours, we can make those changes. So unfortunately, sometimes that means something else has to drop off. We can't just continue to add hours over and over again. But we can make those changes, and we do it in real time. They can very quickly say, hey, this just happened on the street. We saw a body cam video of this. We need to let officers know. And so it allows us to, while we do those routine kinds of trainings all the time to show them not everybody is out to hurt them, it also allows us to say, hey, this is a bad thing that we saw an officer do. Maybe they used a poor tactic, maybe somebody else has figured out a better way to do it, and we can make those changes in real time. So anytime we can get those suggestions or be able to have that dialogue, we have room to make that happen.
One of the things that we might want to do, the Safety Advisory Commission made 80 recommendations to the mayor, and as I recall, a number of them had to do with training. And one that comes to mind, and Brooke was truly an advocate for this, was that we were concerned about the lack of training when it comes to intervening with juveniles. And so, and I know that that the chief has a advisory council, and I think one of the things that they're looking at is, okay, so the recommendations that were made, how many have been implemented, et cetera. It would be good for us, I think, as this board, to get a report back. You may not be aware of some of the recommendations that we made, and quite frankly, as former commission members, we don't know what has been implemented and what hasn't been implemented. So to marry kind of the two conversations that we're talking about here, I think might be a good thing. So I have a question, and this is not to rush you, because I am about, how should I put it? We will accommodate, your schedule, but in terms of what you have left, could you guesstimate how much you still have to do? Because this could be an option. If we don't get it finished today, then we would move it, if possible, to the next meeting, and if that doesn't work, to another meeting, because I don't want you to rush. I don't want board members to in any way not ask questions, but I don't have a crystal ball, and trying to put together this agenda and when, just don't know. So again, not rushing, don't skip things. I'm looking at 30 minutes out, the meeting being over. So just, if you can give me just a little bit of an idea.
I'll go ahead and answer that for you. So in doing this training, and Matt can back me up in this, hopefully, case. Sometimes I get through 4 slides, and sometimes I get through 36. Either way, if I get what we're doing right now, this interaction, it's a win. Okay? This is a win. I've done this class before where I'm like this, and everybody is just staring at me, and I'm getting nothing. Well,
from this group.
We're doing great. We're doing great.
I took a look at the slide presentation. And I know that there is a lot more. So I just want to put everyone at ease, because I know people start looking at watches and there's not enough, because my thought is, let's continue, and then we may need to regroup to say, no, there's more we really want to share, and I will certainly use your input on this, and it'll carry over to another meeting.
There's a couple of things that I can go through quickly that Mr. Furby is going to address at a later time. So some of the legal stuff, I'll just push through that, and I'll get to the back end of this presentation. We'll be able to see it all.
Just want to give you an idea of where we're going.
Yeah, we'll be prepared to stop at 5, and then if there's stuff that you say, hey, we really want to hear more about how you do this kind of training or something specific, we're absolutely prepared to come back whenever you need us.
Let's say you need to be prepared to stop at least 4:55, because there's always those things at the end. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have not yet done the training at the academy, and it sounds like you go through a lot of scenarios with new trainees. And two things, has there ever been a situation where you decided that maybe this particular recruit should not be a police officer?
Yes, ma'am.
It has happened?
All the time.
Okay, so when you're doing these scenarios, sometimes, a suspect may have a pellet gun. And so and also, we've heard a lot recently about supposedly, that officers shoot people of color more so than white people. So do you have scenarios where you have different colored people? I mean, I don't know how you train, but do you allow for this to see if maybe particular officers are likely to shoot at black people more than white people? Or do you allow for this sort of thing? You see what I'm saying here?
I do. So City Council just at their meeting on Monday approved us to purchase a new virtual simulator, the Milo system that the sergeant talked about. The new system that we are going to buy has the ability to do the exact same scenario with people that look differently. There is how precisely that will be used is still up in the air, but we will have the ability to look at that and at the very least get us statistics to say, do we have an issue internally that we need to address, and then seek out and develop training to address that exact issue.
So this is in the beginning stages?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So I think in the advisory commission, and again, as a result of our going through the scenario training, we made a recommendation because we were concerned that in that training, too many of the perpetrators were people of color. And so again, I don't know, maybe this is a reaction or a response to that, but that was a concern that we raised.
Now, do you remember, we're talking about live, like physical live individuals, or the actual ones on the screens? Does anybody remember in particular?
Well, in the live scenarios, it was just the commission members and members of the academy. So no, this was that other thing, the screens, the screen.
On the screen and also in PowerPoints.
Okay.
That the cadets see during the academy.
So the PowerPoints has absolutely been addressed, and the screen has been addressed as well. Yep.
I can tell you that when we do our live scenarios, it's whoever we have available, whether it's myself, Officer Snyder, any of the DTU staff that are there, and the scenario doesn't change. It might just be the role players. We could do it outside at 80-degree heat, right? So we have to switch in and out with the individuals that we have there. But I'm not aware of any specific live tracking that we've had. But say the bank scenario, we would want the same result each time, the scenario result each time.
For an attorney, when they do voir dire, they bring up all the prejudice, et cetera, to let the jury know. They're not going to make them not prejudiced, but just to make them aware of their prejudices. So maybe when you train officers, you might have these scenarios to make a particular officer aware that he might shoot at a black person or a Hispanic person before he shoots at a white person, so that he or she may be aware that they have this tendency and maybe work with themselves. That's what I'm thinking might be it's something that, could be thought about.
I do have a question. I know you've spoken to some of the questions that were asked about how you adapt your training to fill in gaps that people present to you, right? So I guess my question is more from a personal level. Do you all feel satisfied with the training that you're giving cadets? One of the things that you hear so much from the community is what kind of training is going on? What are the community concerns about the training? Just like Chair Jackson said, they, in their commission, they had concerns about, the number of people of color, black folks or whatever, that are present in the training. But from your perspective, are you satisfied with the amount or with the rigor and level and didactic training that the officers are getting? Do you see yourself room for improvement there?
So the last part's easy. We always have room for improvement. I think anybody's fooling themselves if they say that they can't get any better. So we work hard to make sure that we're always getting better. We debrief internally after the scenarios, what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve. Back to the beginning of your question, there is this balance, right, between I need police officers to be out on the street working, and I would like to spend a large amount of time training them. There are other countries where police officers are in training for 3 years before they get out on the street. I don't think we have that luxury here of training them for 3 years. So we could probably always find some way where we would say, we need a little bit more time, we need 1 more week, we need 2 more weeks. And at some point, we have to stop and transition to that training that they do after they leave the academy. So they spend more time after they've left doing more training out on the street before they're out by themselves. So it's trying to find that exact balance between their time here, their time training out on the street, and getting them out there so that we have more police officers to reduce crime in the city.
Result of the negotiations with the last contract, and it was one of our recommendations that the probationary time period has gone from 6 months to a year.
Yes, ma'am.
That is a significant change in what has been the practice here. So,
Absolutely. And so that exact change allowed us to immediately extend the academy by 2 more weeks. So before the contract was negotiated, we started doing that last year with a help from Civil Service Commission. So that extra 2 weeks we put to good use right away. Almost all of those things that we add are scenarios. We do have some classroom stuff. We've also used this extra probation time to work with Franklin University to do, I was trying not to look at her. Yes, to do community immersion training where we ask these brand new officers to identify a non-law enforcement problem in their community and then work to solve that problem and then report back on how they did that so that they are working with the community and it's not here's the police and our only focus is police issues. So it's things like that that we have added, thanks very much to extended probation time.
Thanks so much for that. I think the thought is because a lot of this conversation is around training and adding more training in these pieces, but I think those components are so important because it is thinking about, and especially as a board, what are all of the different alternative approaches to particular situations, right? We can't expect police to solve every problem, every challenge. And so how do we start to think about community safety holistically? How do we start to think about the different roles that folks play? Because the answer can't always be, just more training here, right? And so how do we start to think about these different aspects to it? So I think that's helpful that these different types of programs are out there about different approaches in terms of the ways in which we go after these challenges. So thank you. Thank you for that.
That's a phenomenal point, Mr. Strickland, that you made, because everything that we do for training is going to be in response to what we're being faced with when we're responding to something. I like to talk about policing. Everybody says, well, this proactive approach, this proactive thing. Everything that we do, even our proactivity, is in response to something that is being brought forward to us from the community. So while we talk about training and what we can do to get better, remember, every aspect of our training is going to be geared towards responding to something that is new or coming from where we're responding to, right? And that's a great point about that.
So
So with the hours that you guys are able to fluctuate, I know when I went through the police academy myself, there is very minimal time as far as cultural competency, and always being the only Latina everywhere I go, like even my current position now, I'm the only one there, the only Latina at the 2 police departments that I have worked before, the only Latina. How do you guys teach your cadets not to have those implicit bias towards certain groups of color or ethnicities? Because here in Columbus, we have a growing population, and it's a variety of different ethnicities, people coming from different countries, and there are officers that have never been around people of color or that don't understand that just because they're here in this country, they have to speak English, especially if they just got here. Have you guys increased those hours to teach about cultural competency, especially with like the stereotypes that Latinos have? You know, like we're not all drug dealers. We don't all go out and, you know, sell drugs. And another stereotype that they have is that they're rapists, you know, and those things are not true. So how are you guys dealing with cultural competency with Columbus's big diversity of different ethnicities and people of color?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So the state requires, they kind of lump this all into a topic called human relations. The state requires 84 hours. We add an additional 87 hours of human relations topics. So among those hours, we've started doing community panels. And so we will bring in, say, a New Americans community or an LGBTQ community. And we give officers a few hours to interact with those folks, ask questions, talk to them, to talk about stereotypes, to talk about family history. This is really why I'm here and how my family came to be here. Things like that. In addition, it's recruiting. It's who we're hiring. So that when you're in your police academy class, they don't all look like me. That we have people from very different backgrounds from all over the place, that they can interact together, and those officers recognize, hey, this other person who doesn't look exactly like me, they're still a good person too, and there's still lots of positives. So both of those are things that we have done to try to increase that cultural awareness of what the city of Columbus looks like, who's here in the city of Columbus, and getting officers to know those folks. Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions, but since you're here, I'm gonna get them out. So in the human interest section, when I did the ride-along, I actually had this question, and the person who I was with, I don't feel answered it. But the question I have is, are you teaching officers about the history that communities have with policing and the effect that these past decades of, really negative policing, do you teach your cadets how that impacts the now? Because the question that I had, we were working in a historically black community, but segregation and the highways and redlining and all of that, all of those things go together. That wasn't so long ago, right? So these people are still living in these neighborhoods, and these histories and these memories live on. So when new officers come into the system, are y'all training them about the past decades of relationships that police have had with the community? Is that an area that you put emphasis on and before they go out into said communities?
I can actually answer that just a little bit for you. I don't know about the classes prior to April 9th of 2021, but so far we've done about 3, and it's an integral part of the community immersion. As a matter of fact, it's one of the first things that we cover. It's race and the history of policing, and we actually built that in collaboration with Sergeant James Fuqua and Officer Will James, because they already teach part of that. And so what we did was simply expand upon it. And we cover it all. In addition to that, We prepare the recruits as well as the FTOs, because we've done community immersion with recruits as well as the field training officers before they go out into the communities, that they learn about like redlining and all of that stuff. So part of that expansion of the probationary period really allowed us to develop out this community immersion. It's pretty comprehensive in nature because we also send them out into the community to meet with people at the different areas. So the different racial groups, populations and stuff like that, they're really immersed with those communities. And so we worked on it. And one of the other things that we've done is we quiz and we survey the recruits just to make sure that they are learning and that they're retaining that information. And then we regularly meet with the academy staff, especially, I'm drawing a blank. Sergeant Barker, yes, on the feedback that we get. So if there are areas of improvement or if we need to tweak something or change it, or if there's something that was already covered. Like for instance, the first time we did community immersion, we had LGBTQIA, found out that they had an extensive array of that in the academy. So what we did was we found out what they learned and we built and expanded upon that. And so it is constantly evolving and changing, but yes, we covered Franklin University with the recruits.
That was one of our training committee recommendations too. After looking through all of the CDP training and OPATA requirements, one of our specific recommendations as a safety commission was that exact history you mentioned start to be included in what cadets were learning, and in conjunction with increasing the probation time because of the issue with how long they had to get so many hours in. So I'm glad to hear that that's changed.
The things that you added into the program are a result of what the Safety Commission determined? Is that what?
It's multiple factors. It was the work of the Safety Commission. It was working with the academy because apparently we were all working on community immersion at the same time. And so we combined both of those efforts. And it's also with the city attorney's office, so helping these zone attorneys, because I'm not familiar with all the areas in the city of Columbus, but many of the zone attorneys, because they're there working at the different precincts or whatever with the police officers, they can also help. So this was a big collaborative effort.
I'm going to determine from the interest that I hear in this particular subject, community immersion, that this, as the Committee on Training and Education, once you come together, that this might be a topic. I'm just going to put it under education. So it's not a part of the training that we must do, but I'm hearing a significant amount of interest. So at a future board meeting, probably well into next year, one of the topics could be the community immersion. And so I've put it in the parking lot for right now. You know, this might be a good time for us to stop. It's about 10 of 5, a lot of questions. I have a couple of, and so I want to say thank you for being with us today. And you will be back. I mean, I think we probably need to just go ahead and look at that November 8th date to see if it would work, because I'm pretty sure there is much more for you to share with us, and there'll be many more questions. I mean, I will certainly work. The Deputy Director speaks, and with the commander to kind of, to see, but I'm just guessing that that's a situation that well, not a situation, it's a conversation that we want to continue. I always like to wrap up on time, and there were just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. I wanted to say thank you to the board for adjusting your schedule so that our next meeting will be on November the 8th. November the 8th at 2 p.m. We will not be back here. We're going to be back in that first location, in the garage. But I really, really thank you for your flexibility in getting that scheduled. And I sent around a sheet asking members to identify your areas of interest. And I can see I'm going to have quite the challenge. 6 of 9 of you named the same 2 committees, and you can probably guess what they are: training and education and community engagement. So I want to thank you for responding to me so quickly, but I would also ask you to think, in light of this most current information that I just gave you, that if you would think about maybe even another, committee, because you all want to be in the same place. Is there anything else that needs to come before the board, before we adjourn?
I would like to say, we are definitely going to have the officers back for our next meeting, will it?
Well, I don't know their schedules.
Because I did have one other thing that I wanted to bring up, but I'll wait until the next
And I'm
meeting.
not going to ask for a commitment with them sitting, right here. The date is November the 8th. The time is 2:00. If you could accommodate us, we'd be quite grateful. Because again, I don't think it's just one more questioner. I think there's more information to be shared with us as a board, and there are going to be many more questions, okay? So we'll work on that. I wasn't seeing a nodding of head saying, oh, yes, we can do it. But maybe you can do it? Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else? I just wanted to, and it's a pretty late announcement tomorrow, so it's pretty late. But I wanted to share with you at the Columbus Metropolitan Club that Chief Bryant is the invited guest. And so if you've never been to the Columbus Metropolitan Club, you can Google and find out about it, but it's typically lunch, and then there's either a panel or there's an individual. So Chief Bryant will be there tomorrow. Lunch starts at 11:30, and it's up at, what do they call that place? The Boathouse? The Boathouse. I personally would just like to show her support as a member of this board and of this community. If there isn't anything else, then I need to entertain a motion to adjourn. I say a motion over here and a second. The pastors are in tandem today, right?
Except he's a devil's advocate there.
Oh, okay, all right. So there's been a motion and a second. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, please raise your hands. We are adjourned until November the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you very much.